For the next year is going to be, stay at that level and continue all the time at the same level.
Ferrero finally reveals what he did that night. 6 months of silence. Now it's out. For months, people got fake quotes instead of real answers. Just this June, an Italian newspaper invented words and put them in Ferrero's mouth. Words about Alcaraz, about money, about a $9 million yacht. Ferrero was furious. He released an emergency public statement, and the whole tennis world stopped and asked the same thing. Why is this man still bleeding over someone who clearly moved on? Because what happened that night has never been fully told. December 17th. Alcaraz posted to the world, 7 years, 6 Grand Slams, done. He told the entire world he was finally free. No phone call to Ferrero, no final conversation. The man who controlled every detail of Alcaraz's training, his schedule, his discipline, his Ibiza trips, found out through a screen. The same screen 40 million fans used. Control was not just lost, it was taken, quietly, surgically, by people above the player's head. Ferrero stayed silent for months. He needed to heal first. Now he finally reveals what he actually did the moment it happened. And it is nothing like you expect. Subscribe before this one gets taken down. What Ferrero did that night was nothing. He sat in Villena. He did not pick up the phone. He did not drive to Murcia. He did not send a message to the player he had coached since the age of 15. He posted his statement, closed the laptop, and sat with the wreckage of the most successful coaching relationship in modern tennis. That is the revelation. Not a dramatic confrontation, not a midnight call. Silence. Deliberate, agonizing, dignified silence from a man who had just been handed a 48-hour ultimatum after 7 years of building something extraordinary and had watched it evaporate before he could say goodbye properly. To understand why that silence is the real story, you have to go back to the beginning. Not December 2025, much further back. It was September 2018 when Ferrero first started working with a 15-year-old Carlos Alcaraz. Ferrero had already retired from professional tennis. He had already won Roland Garros in 2003, already reached the world #1 ranking, already built his Equalite Academy in Villena. He had briefly coached Alexander Zverev and walked away. He was done with coaching. Then Alcaraz's agent, Albert Molina, convinced him to take a look at this kid from El Palmar, Murcia. Ferrero looked, and something clicked. What followed was not just a coaching relationship. Ferrero himself described it repeatedly as a father-son bond. Alcaraz called him a second father publicly on multiple occasions for years. Every interview, every trophy ceremony, every post-match press conference, Ferrero was the name that came up first. The gratitude was real. The affection was visible. You could see it in how Alcaraz looked at Ferrero in the player's box during matches. You could see it in how Ferrero's face moved when Alcaraz won a crucial point. For 7 years, Ferrero controlled the architecture of Alcaraz's career. Not in a manipulative sense, in the way that a great coach controls the entire environment around a developing athlete. He decided the training schedule, he decided the tournament calendar, he decided when Alcaraz needed to push harder and when he needed to rest. He was the authority in the room. When Alcaraz was 15, 16, 17, that structure was not just helpful, it was essential. Alcaraz had enormous natural talent, but no professional framework. Ferrero provided it completely. He was also demanding. Not cruel, not toxic, but demanding in the specific way that only someone who has stood at the top of the sport themselves can be. Ferrero had won Grand Slams. He had been world #1. He understood precisely what it required. He watched Alcaraz carefully. He praised him publicly. But privately, there were standards. There were expectations. There were moments where Ferrero made it clear that talent without sacrifice was a dead end. That philosophy worked spectacularly for years. By 2022, Alcaraz won the US Open and became the youngest world #1 in ATP history at 19 years old. Ferrero won Coach of the Year. By 2023, 2 Wimbledon titles. By 2024, the French Open added to the collection. By 2025, Alcaraz had 6 Grand Slams, 8 Masters 1000 titles, and was finishing the year as world #1 again with a 71-9 record. He had just won both Roland Garros and the US Open in the same season. On December 11th, just 6 days before the split was announced, Ferrero and Samuel Lopez were jointly named 2025 ATP Coaches of the Year. Ferrero had now won that award twice. The partnership looked unbreakable from the outside. Ferrero had already planned the entire 2026 preseason and Australian Open schedule. Everything was in motion for another dominant year. Then December 13th arrived. On that Saturday morning, Ferrero received a new contract proposal from Alcaraz's camp. The contract came with a condition attached. He had 48 hours to accept or reject the terms. Not days, not weeks. 48 hours to decide whether to continue a 7-year relationship that had produced 24 titles and 6 Grand Slams. The proposal contained what Ferrero would later describe as non-sporting clauses, terms that went beyond the court, beyond tactics and training, terms about the professional direction of Alcaraz's career, terms that Ferrero could not agree to. Nobody sat down to talk. That is the detail that cuts the deepest when you examine what happened. Ferrero said it himself, plainly, in his first interview with Marca on December 24th. He said that perhaps the disagreement could have been resolved if both sides had simply sat in a room and spoken. But they didn't. The Monday deadline passed. No agreement, no conversation, no resolution, just silence on both sides, and then a decision. By December 17th, Alcaraz posted to his social media. The announcement was out. The tennis world stopped. Here is what the tennis world did not immediately understand. The decision was not entirely Alcaraz's. Multiple sources inside the Spanish tennis community confirmed this, and Tony Nadal, a man who spent decades in the exact same dynamic with Rafael Nadal, said it clearly. He told media that it was impossible Ferrero was dismissed without Alcaraz's knowledge and approval, but he also understood what had actually shifted. As Alcaraz grew from a teenager into a global superstar worth hundreds of millions in endorsements, with his own family's academy in El Palmar now operating and growing, the balance of power in the relationship had moved. The father, Carlos Alcaraz Sr., had always been present, but the more successful his son became, the more Sr. wanted to be in control of the direction. Alcaraz's first childhood coach, Carlos Santos, was even blunter. He told media directly that, in the end, Carlos's father is the one who is really in charge. He suggested that Alcaraz himself would have continued with Ferrero for as long as Ferrero wanted. That single statement, from a man who knew this family before Ferrero ever arrived, tells you everything about the power structure that existed behind the scenes. Ferrero knew it too. He confirmed in later interviews that he had spoken to Alcaraz beforehand, asked if the player was aware of everything on the table, and Alcaraz said yes. After that, Ferrero spoke to the people he needed to speak with. He deliberately stepped back from direct contact with Alcaraz because he understood the player was informed and the decision had been made at a level above the coaching relationship. He did not call. He did not go to Murcia. He went home. Now step back and consider what the public saw that night. They saw Alcaraz's statement first, a beautifully written post, warm and gracious. He thanked Ferrero for making childhood dreams a reality. He said they had reached the top together and that if their sporting paths had to separate, it should be from the top, from the place they had always worked toward. It read like a mutual decision between two people who loved each other. It read like a clean break. Then came Ferrero's statement. Also warm, also gracious, also beautifully written. He spoke about shared experiences, about hard work, about unforgettable moments. He wished Alcaraz the best. He said he was convinced good memories and good people always find a way to cross paths again. And then the last line, 5 words, the ones that cracked the entire narrative open for anyone paying attention. I wish I could have continued. That sentence destroyed the clean break illusion completely, because you do not write that sentence in a mutual split. You do not write that if you were the one who decided to leave. That sentence is the sentence of a man who wanted to stay and was told, politely but firmly, that the arrangement was changing in ways he could not accept. The tennis world argued about it for days. Fans split into camps. Some said Alcaraz had every right to move on. Some said Ferrero had been treated without proper respect after 7 years. Tony Nadal criticized the 48-hour ultimatum publicly, saying it was a bit strange to rush someone into a decision like that after such a long relationship. The Spanish press ran contradictory stories, some claiming the split was about money, some claiming it was about the location of training, some claiming it was deeper than both. Ferrero shut down the money angle quickly. In his Marca interview a week later, he said the financial issue was not the primary problem. He acknowledged the contract contained terms he could not agree with, but refused to go into specifics. He called the whole situation a deep wound. He said he was hurting. He said he had given it everything he had. But there was something else Ferrero was carrying that December, something the financial arguments and the contract disputes were covering up. It was a philosophical disagreement that had been growing underneath the surface for much longer than anyone on the outside had noticed. Ferrero is not a man who operates on instinct and spontaneity. He is methodical, structured, analytical in a way that is almost unusual for a Spaniard in a sport that rewards emotional fire. Fernando Meligeni, a former Brazilian professional who knew Ferrero well during their playing days, described him with a phrase that stuck: Scandinavian sobriety. That is what Ferrero brought to the coaching box: discipline, order, an almost cold assessment of what was required to sustain excellence at the highest level. Alcaraz is not that. Alcaraz is joy. He is showmanship. He is the player who holds his racket up to his ear to hear the crowd, who does a Cristiano Ronaldo celebration after a crucial point, who went to Ibiza before Wimbledon and then went out and won the title anyway. He made a Netflix documentary called A Mi Manera, My Way, and the title was not accidental. It was a declaration. This is how I do things. My terms, my pace, my life. For years, Ferrero managed that tension privately. He tolerated the Ibiza trips because the results justified the approach. He adapted his training philosophy to fit a player who needed joy built into the preparation rather than ground out of it. He compromised more than his instincts wanted him to. Sources inside their circle confirmed this, that Ferrero had been bending toward Alcaraz's preferred style for the better part of 2 years, accepting that the player would spend more time training at home in Murcia rather than at Ferrero's academy in Villena. But in his March 2026 deep dive interview on the El Cafelito podcast, when 3 months of distance had given him enough clarity to speak more openly, Ferrero finally said what he had been thinking for a long time. He said that Alcaraz's understanding of work and sacrifice was different from his own. He said the Ibiza trips, the frequent mental resets, the prioritization of enjoyment as a preparation philosophy. They made him doubt whether Alcaraz, approached this way, could actually become the greatest player in history. He said those exact words. It makes me doubt if, like that, he can become the best in history. That is not the statement of a man talking about a contract dispute. That is the statement of a coach who watched a player reach the top and then worried, genuinely and professionally, that the ceiling was being set lower than it should be. That is the real friction that the non-sporting clauses in a contract were trying to formalize. The question was never just about money or location. The question was about the next chapter. Who was in control of the direction, what standards would be maintained, and whether Ferrero's vision for Alcaraz's legacy matched the vision that Alcaraz and his family had built for themselves. The answer was no, it had not matched for some time. And by December 2025, the gap had become too wide to negotiate across in 48 hours. After the split, Alcaraz moved forward without missing a single beat. He went into the 2026 Australian Open under enormous external pressure. Every analyst, every former player, every pundit with a microphone was asking the same question: can he win a Grand Slam without Ferrero? Some were openly skeptical. Boris Becker said the pressure was on Alcaraz to prove something. Greg Rusetsky predicted Ferrero would be rehired by mid-season because Alcaraz would need him. Alcaraz heard all of it. He chose to shut it out entirely. He said so himself at the Australian Open, that he came to Melbourne focused on his team, trusting the process, blocking every external voice. He reached the final without dropping a set until his extraordinary semi-final against Alexander Zverev, a match that lasted 5 hours and 27 minutes, the longest Australian Open semi-final in tournament history. He came back from 2-2 to win the fifth. Then he beat Novak Djokovic in the final, becoming the youngest man in history to complete a career Grand Slam. In his victory speech on the biggest night of his career to that point, Alcaraz did not mention Ferrero once. Not on court, not in the locker room, not in the press conference. 3 opportunities, 3 silences. Journalists noticed. One reporter asked him directly whether winning the first Grand Slam without Ferrero was extra motivation. Alcaraz said no, not really. He said he came to play for himself and for his team. His team. The members he had with him in that moment. Ferrero was back in Spain watching highlights on his phone because watching the full match was too painful. He told Spanish radio station El Larguero that it was not easy, that it made him melancholic to see the whole team there without him, that it brought back everything. He was happy for Alcaraz, genuinely. That was clear from everything he said. But the happiness was laced with something else. Grief, maybe. The specific grief of watching something you built succeed without you. Then came the moment that nobody quite expected. Days after Alcaraz's Australian Open win, fans noticed that Ferrero had unfollowed Alcaraz on Instagram. Alcaraz was still following Ferrero. Just Ferrero, who had quietly removed himself from the feed. The internet treated it as a betrayal. Headlines were written, theories multiplied. In his El Cafelito interview in March, Ferrero addressed it calmly. He said he needed to create some emotional distance. He said the unfollow was not spite, it was self-preservation. He admitted it barely worked because Alcaraz appeared constantly through tennis accounts anyway. But the gesture told you everything about the state he was in. This was a man trying to move forward and finding it almost impossible because the thing he was trying to move on from kept winning. Alcaraz won the Qatar Open 12 matches unbeaten to start 2026, his best ever beginning to a season that started the week after the split became public. The numbers were the cruelest possible way for that story to continue. Then in June, the fake quote incident exploded. An Italian newspaper, Corriere della Sera, ran an interview with Ferrero and published what they claimed was his response to comments made by veteran coach Riccardo Piatti. Piatti had joked that if Ferrero were still making decisions, Alcaraz would never have been allowed to buy a custom 88-foot catamaran worth approximately $9 million. The story spread across every tennis media platform within hours. There was one problem. Ferrero had never said what they claimed he said. The paper attributed lines to him about his children, about raising Alcaraz like family, about discipline and money. None of it was accurate. Ferrero released an emergency statement on Instagram. He dismantled the quotes one by one. He said he never referred to his children in the interview. He said he had no judgment about the yacht, that buying a yacht was neither good nor bad. He ended the statement with a line that landed like a verdict. Don't believe everything you read. Verify the information. Go to original sources. Draw your own conclusions. For a man who had spent months being careful with his words, being measured in interviews, refusing to name names or assign blame, that statement was out of character enough to be significant. It told you that Ferrero had reached a point where the distortion of the story was no longer something he could absorb quietly. He had been hurt enough already. He was not going to let invented quotes add to it. In that same period, Ferrero told Spanish media something that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. He said that coaching Jannik Sinner would be wonderful. Not that he had been approached, not that anything was in motion, but that the idea of coaching the player who is Alcaraz's greatest rival, the Italian who embodies everything Ferrero believes about discipline and professional sacrifice, would be wonderful. Read that carefully. Ferrero has watched Sinner from the outside for years. He knows exactly what Sinner is, a player built on structure, on consistency, on the kind of methodical preparation that Ferrero himself lived as a professional. Sinner does not take mid-season holidays to Ibiza. Sinner does not build his preparation around the philosophy of enjoyment first. Sinner is, in temperament and approach, closer to Ferrero than Alcaraz has been for several years. That public statement was not random. It was the sound of a man finally allowing himself to imagine a future that looked different from the one he had been living. Meanwhile, Alcaraz is injured. A right wrist injury sustained in Barcelona during his opening round win at the ATP 500 forced him to withdraw from the rest of the clay season: Rome, Roland Garros, and then Wimbledon too. He went from being unbeatable at the start of 2026 to sitting out the entire middle of the year. David Ferrer, speaking as Spain's Davis Cup captain in June 2026, confirmed the recovery was progressing, but stressed that Alcaraz would not return until there was absolutely no risk of aggravating the same injury. He said Alcaraz had the desire to compete. He was spotted practicing in Murcia with his left hand. And Ferrero? He is at his academy in Villena. He is traveling, he is working with young Spanish golfer Angel Ayora, focusing on the mental side of performance. He has not returned to professional tennis coaching. He says he is better now, that 3 months of healing have helped, but that the breakup was significant enough to deserve a proper period of mourning. He still wants the coffee, the hug, the pending conversation he described in detail on El Cafelito, just to sit quietly with Alcaraz and remember everything they went through together. He said it would happen. He believes it will. Whether it does or not, the shape of this story is now clear. Ferrero did not storm out. He was not fired in a dramatic scene. He was not the controlling villain the title of this video suggested at the start. The real story is the opposite. He was the man who provided the structure, the discipline, the standards, the control that turned a gifted 15-year-old from El Palmar into a 7-time Grand Slam champion. And when that player outgrew the structure, when the family around him decided it was time to run things their own way, the contract that came on a Saturday morning with a 48-hour window was not a negotiation. It was a notification. Ferrero went home. He sat with it. He stayed silent for months because he needed to. When he finally spoke, he did not attack anyone. He did not name the father. He did not publish the non-sporting clauses. He said he was hurting, that he had given everything, and that deep down in his heart, he could not say no to Alcaraz if asked again. That is not the behavior of a man who lost control. That is the behavior of a man who handed it over, gracefully, to someone who had already taken it. If this story hit differently than you expected, if it made you see what actually happened between these two men, then subscribe to this channel right now. We go where the real story is, not where the headline points. Hit the bell. You will not want to miss what comes next, because this story is not over. Alcaraz is injured, Ferrero is available, and the tennis world is about to find out whether second parts can sometimes be good after all.